Hello.
Hey, Alex, can you hear me?
Can you hear me, Tony?
Yeah, I could hear you, Alex.
Awesome.
Can you both see my screen okay? Full screen?
Yeah.
Great.
Good on our end.
Ileana's having trouble joining. Good afternoon. We'll be starting momentarily. We're just waiting for our last panelist to join. She's having some technology issues.
Ileana, can you hear us?
Is Ileana here?
It looks like she's joined, but I'm not sure if she could hear us. Ileana, can you hear us? She's muted.
I can hear, but I cannot turn my camera for some reason.
That's okay. Should we go ahead and get started? Yeah. All right. So, hi everyone. Thanks for taking the time out of your day to attend our global communication skill building session. It's nice to virtually meet all of you. Q, would you be able to change the slide for me? Thanks. Herein is a listing of our presenters. We've got Alex Picalo, our Director in Engineering, Ileana Santoyo, Program Manager, and myself, Tony Mendoza, Internal Audit Manager. Next slide, please, Q. So, thanks, Q. My name is Antonio Mendoza. I go by Tony because it's a little easier to enunciate, and it's also the same name my dad adopted when he came to the United States. I'm a first-generation Mexican-American Chicano, and am one of three brothers. I currently am an internal audit manager for Autodesk, and my work is probably best categorized as compliant-based around financial reporting. To go into a little further detail, I received my degree in accounting and finance from Sonoma State University. Sonoma State's in the California North Bay, about an hour north of San Francisco. And in my day-to-day job, I would say I perform numerous tasks to help ensure Autodesk financial statements comply with SEC standards, along with being the liaison for the audit team with new financial projects. Again, nice to virtually meet everyone. Now I would like to introduce my colleague Alex, who will be sharing a few things about himself.
All right, so my name is Alex, and I am from Brazil. I've been at Autodesk for around 20 years now, and I've had multiple jobs here. I started as a manual tester and been progressing through my career, and now I lead a engineering team for our cloud infrastructure. And with this, I'm going to pass on to Ileana.
Thank you, Alex and Tony. I'm glad to be here. And I was born and raised in Mexico City, and I am very excited to be here. Sorry that I cannot be on camera today. I have some issues with the settings, but I will talk a little bit about myself. As a kid, I wanted to be either a teacher or a doctor, but as I grew up,
I think
I
Ileana's having
realized that
some
I had different interests in life,
sound
and I
difficulty.
chose engineering as a profession. And what I have learned through all my professional years is that you need to be adaptable, and you need to also be flexible to learn different kind of skill sets, because that will help you growth and be more uh, visible within an organization. So definitely, that was one of my takeaways. I am now an Autodesk employee. I started as a field marketing specialist, supporting the education team, then moved into sales, and finally working as a project and program manager, supporting the Americas region. So that's a little bit about myself. And I think we're moving on to the agenda today. And the reason why we're here, definitely, we are glad to be part of the Latin Heritage Month Summit. And I will speak on behalf of Tony and Alex, but we feel proud and honored to be your guests at Techqueria Summit. And I was reflecting about this month and about this day in particular. And this is a celebration of our Latin and Hispanic community. And the ability to be here today is definitely a gift. We all share a common interest, and most importantly, we're connecting with a purpose. So we hope that we can give you some good ideas and career consejos to move to a more senior position in your job and succeed globally while expressing your culture. So definitely, we are glad to be here. Thank you. Gracias. Obrigado. Uh, so the next slide, please. If we can move on to the next one.
Alex and Tony, while we try to sort out Ileana's audio and video, do you want to start with maybe some questions first?
Oh, we were able to hear Ileana. The group wasn't?
Yeah, I think so. I think
didn't
we're
hear
good with the
her.
audio, right?
Yeah, I could hear you, Ileana.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah. It sounds like
Everyone is
everybody can
here.
hear. Yeah.
So I will
Okay,
move on.
perfect.
So
Sounds like okay,
let's move
cool.
on with the agenda to be mindful of the time because there are a lot of things that we can share today. And maybe we can do a quick poll question. Maybe you can help me answer through the chat. I know that some of you are in your entry level position job experience. So, how many of you are less than 3 years? How many of you are from three to 6 years or more than 6 years? Maybe you can help us uh, answer some of the questions just to have a sense of the audience. For us, it's pretty important. 1 3 years, 3 years. Okay. So right at 3 years, 6 plus, less than 3 years. So I'm sensing here in average, you're around maybe 3 4 years, I will say. Okay, so whatever you're in your career path right now, I think it's what we're going to share today. It's more about the best practices and some of the tips that we have found important and valuable in our careers through all these years. So I will start. Thank you for jumping in. Oh, we have more. I will say uh, intermediate and people who are also advancing in their careers plus 8 years or 10 plus. Okay, so that's interesting. So let's move on into the next slide. And one of the topics, the three different topics that I would like to share with you are about business English, but it's not really about vocabulary or about grammar, but it's about working globally, how to write emails, some best practices that I have found useful in my career, and as I will say, some takeaways or resources, right? So if
Next slide,
someone can
right?
help me advance to that next slide. Yes.
I'm sorry, team. I still can't hear Ileana at all. If someone can help me prompt me to next.
I got you.
Thank you, Tony.
I'll chime in. No worries.
Okay. So so the next slide or the next slide, please.
Next slide, please.
Yep. Yeah. So those are the topics, and maybe you can go next.
Next slide.
Okay, so it's about working globally. So it's not new, of course, that a lot of companies are relying on teams who are located in dispersed locations. So working globally is also about understanding and about knowing the culture you work with. So I will share one of a personal stories I had once a manager from Singapore. And of course, coming from Latin culture and being Mexican, I wasn't remotely related to the management style that she had. So I remember that we had a one-to-one session, and one of the first questions that I asked her was, what is your management style? How would you prefer to communicate? right? If it's an email, if it's through Teams or chat or Skype or whatever the platform was at that time. And that was really important because you need to establish a clear way of communicating with your manager or with your peers. So we agree upon some rules, common rules, and some guidelines. And I think that was a very successful business relationship that we had. So I think that's always good to ask whenever you have the opportunity to work with people from different cultures. And the other thing, it's also being yourself and being authentic. And it doesn't you need to be polite, of course, and respectful when you are addressing to people, but you can also adapt your own style and do something that really stands out for the people you're working with. Let's say you're very proficient in making presentations, right? So you add that particular slight style to that, and everyone, I'm sure, will recognize that from you. And I think that's also part of the experience that I like to share. So the next slide, please. I'm sharing
Next slide,
some
Q.
best practices and ask clear, straightforward questions. So it's really something that we should do, right? Regardless of the seniority that we that we have, and especially because we are not native speakers like myself. Always ask, if you understood correctly. Define deadlines and priority. Don't assume that because you think that tomorrow it's good enough, maybe something that it's requested from your boss is needed right away, right? So it's always good to clarify. um, and also summarize frequently because that helps you have a clear understanding on the next steps. Structure your points and, of course, speak slowly, pause frequently. That was one of the feedbacks that I got. I recently joined a training course about presentation, and they said to me, you're okay with your communication style, but you need to pause. And pausing, it's important because you allow some people to reflect on what you're saying and ask questions. So that's something that you also need to have in mind. So for the do's and don'ts on the next slide,
Next slide,
please.
Q.
So, of course, here are some of them. I'm sure you have encountered this kind of situations in your professional life, but I will go with the do. Definitely do always a proofreading of what you're writing. Make sure that to whom you are addressing with, you are addressing to him or her properly. And also, don't do the reply all. I have and also a personal story. There was an email thread where I was expecting some approval with a pilot project, and it turned to be almost like a novel because it was huge and a huge email thread. So everyone was answering, and we almost lost the flow of the communication because everyone was answering on that same email. It would have been better if we had a maybe a collaboration document or a presentation, something where we can get updated on the progress. So just be mindful about that. And also, yes, I'm reading here. Oscar, writing in caps is so huge. Can't believe people still do it. Yes, so please don't do that. It's not very polite. And also use the correct subject line. How many times have you read an email where the subject line is not remotely connected with the content? So imagine you are sending this email to a legal partner or to a senior level. You want this to be important and relevant for them. So make sure that the subject line, it also matches with the content. So in summary, best practices for communication on the next slide, please. Uh,
Next
Respect
slide.
differences, build trust, and stay connected. Find ways to stay connected with your peers and with your managers. Find those common grounds where you can also have the opportunity to communicate with them. And on the next two slides, I will share two stories, I would say best practices that I have found really useful in my career. So the next slide, it's about when you're ready to advance in your professional career. And this might relate to someone, to something that you're living right now or you are close to face. So in the next slide, it's about what should you have take into consideration. So the first thing is have a development plan. So even if you're deciding about advancing your career, applying to a different position within the same company, or aiming for a higher level position, you need to have a development plan. And that starts with a commitment to the what and the how, right? So you need to have a very clear understanding on your team and company goals. Where do you want to go and what are your skill sets that you need to build on? And that goes along to preparing yourself. So whatever you study, and I was opening this conversation with a personal story about being an engineer and that I have never worked as an engineer, but that doesn't refrain me to apply some skill set that I learned in college. But let's say you have a job profile that was given to you by HR or by your current manager, and let's say you cover three of five assets that you're supposed to excel at. So what about the other two that you're not really good at? So you need to do a self assessment and also find different ways where you can learn more about getting better. Maybe you go into a mentorship program, or you apply to a training course, or do something, by to get better and improve that skill set. And the last point is having a mentor and a sponsor. The mentor is a person who gives you an advice and will guide you through your career, but a sponsor will help you advance. You are lucky if you have both of them, but if not, definitely that's something that will give you more confidence in in working around your development plan. And of course, this is something that you should address with a manager or with HR. What are the opportunities within the company you are in to advance in your career? So the other example, it's about making it right on your first executive presentation. And this is something that I have also had experience couple of months ago. So let's say you have this huge opportunity to present to an executive, right? It's a one life opportunity, but you need to get prepared for that. You don't have to improvise. So one of the 6 tips that I can share with you on the next slide. So first of all, define why are you presenting, right? What is the topic? What is the time that you have to present? Being mindful that executives have busy agenda, so make sure you check with his or her assistant what are the most convenient time slots in their calendar. What is the goal? And where's the business reason of presenting this? Because it should be relevant and important to them, right? And that has to be related to business. And of course, who is attending? Who is your audience? Are you presenting to a director, to a more senior person? Try to navigate a little bit into the org chart to get to know them, and be prepared also to have some questions prepared in advance. And the things that you must know, and this will summarize what I'm telling you. Uh, be your own timekeeper. I think it's something that we almost miss. We have maybe 20 minutes to present to an executive. You need to make sure you convey all your message in that time frame, but also give enough time for questions and discussion, because that will be the most relevant thing. Don't do more than 10 slides, include a lot of images, less text, and also at the end, summarize and define action items, confirm your requests, and ask, if you're asking for budget to run a project or to launch a campaign or whatever the thing you're asking for. So always good to confirm the understanding and have a verbal agreement. And on my next and final slide, I would like to share some resources. And I will say resources for all learners, because, like myself, I learn by watching. But I will highly recommend, if you have time, to read this book about remote work revolution. It's written by Tsedal Neely. She's a professor of Harvard Business School, and she focuses on how leaders can develop and implement global and digital strategies. I think it's an accurate book, and I will highly recommend that. One of the other tools that I use, it's I watch and I follow this lady, Anne Marie. She's a founder of Speak Confident English. She does like short clips, 10 minutes clips, where she gives some good advice on how to use English properly. And the last thing, take advantage of free resources, LinkedIn, Udemy. There are a lot of free training courses that you can enroll to. And definitely, you can also add some badges to your resume. So with that, I will set the stage for Tony. Thank you.
Thanks, Ileana. So I apologize. I know we're up against it with time, so I'm going to breeze through some of my content.
You're good. You're
Okay.
good, Tony.
All right. Yeah.
You're good. We've got 20 minutes till the
Okay.
top of the hour. So
All right.
take
Awesome.
your
Awesome.
time.
Well, adapting to your audience, learning to speak with different groups. What has been the most difficult and challenging for me at the management level has been finding the right conversational mix when addressing different groups. Speaking with senior leaders of the company is significantly different than speaking with our peers, which often reminds me of my upbringing and socializing with the different friend groups, whether it's Asians, Caucasians, African Americans, other Hispanic friend groups, as they all had culturally rich, diverse ways of communicating. And in my line of work, compliance is always at the forefront. I'm either dealing with our external auditors, internal auditors, finance stakeholders, legal counsel, or senior members of the company. And trust me, it all requires a different way and a finesse way of conversating in order to clearly articulate a message. And as I've mentioned before, I'm part of our company's internal audit group. And while you may think, oh, these pesky auditors are only out to find fraud, that's actually not all that we do. I'm sorry to disappoint you. Actually, we're more often than not advisors to the company, and we work with financial stakeholders to understand our current process of financial activities. So there will be times where I'm asked to lead manager meetings where I'm speaking and driving conversations with our collections department and jumping into calls with our revenue department and advocating why I believe we need certain controls in their process. And let me tell you, this can be frightening and scary because, at the end of the day, I'm not really in the day-to-day details. I'm just advising. However, it's interesting considering that we I come from the Latin community where males are raised to be ultra machismo-esque, so the thought of being scared and vulnerable is frowned upon, and quite frankly, something that's been really challenging for me to learn to curb throughout my career. So, anyways, that being said, um, I have leveraged some of the old school Latin upbringing morals in my day-to-day practice, as I often start conversations with an intent to establish content before or, establish connection before content. Sorry about that. And I'd like to do that whether through a compliment, a smile, small talk about friends, family, sports, really anything to establish a baseline of comfort outside of work. And this trait can often be confused for brown nosing. I've actually gotten that as a point before, but I will be honest with you. I'm a very honest and authentic fellow, which I believe bleeds into conversation as it breaks the ice and allows for personality and authenticity in conversations. And I truly believe knowing the personnel and individuals you communicate, and the individuals you are communicating with is a foundational pillar to continued success in your career. Ah, all right. So, how does all of this help you in the real world? Well, let me tell you, as part of my job, whether I'm advocating for a control failure or I'm in a lively discussion with management, the information can be heavy and can be triggering at times, but establishing a baseline and a rapport allows for a breath of fresh air and realness before the realness begins. I've seen, many prospective managers and higher level folks still struggle with this, and at times, it could be career inhibiting soft skill. So, anyways, I'd, I'd like to receive and solicit positive reactions from different management groups. So if I'm able to personalize and establish a connection before the conversation, I always find that to be successful. Um, and then one last thing I'd like to talk about, and something that has helped me navigate through my career, and I accredit this to my love and passion for American football, go Raiders, is that having a playbook going into conversations, making sure you have your first handful of questions well thought out and scripted. So when you begin your meeting slash conversation, everything is recited and practiced, which allows you to think on the fly and allow for more brain power while listening. That's right, Jessica, go Raiders. Rough outing on Monday. All right. So day-to-day communication. Keeping management and employees appraised of your day-to-day activities is imperative and something that consumes about 80% of my time. In this COVID world, learning to balance what your manager needs versus what your team needs is often a balancing act that is ever evolving. Needless to say, the pressure on the plates of managers is high. In one hand, I need to have a solid understanding of all the day to day activities for some of our riskier financial functions. For example, what goes into a credit review for some of our riskier resellers, and how often do we perform those? And then I also empower my staff to ask questions, perform testing, all as the company's having multiple projects aimed at changing how we're doing our financial operations today. It's a juggling act trying to balance everything as I'm asked to be present in multiple places, which let me be the first to tell you, it's impossible to do. And I have yet to be able to master that. However, I will tell you this. Being first generation Mexican American Chicano, this wasn't new for me, and I'm sure many of you can relate to this. But I grew up being my family translator. I grew up going with Tio Jose to the doctors because he had a bad back. I had to manage figuring out the prescription for his pain meds, all while doing algebra homework and dealing with mi hermanito chingandoing, hey, can we go home now? I was raised in an environment where, you know, this was fluid and required managing a lot of moving parts, which I'm so grateful for because it's helped foster skill sets that I think many of us can relate to, whether it's we're thinking on the spot, pushing through internal doubts, which we could have a whole separate discussion on, and really just the ability to clearly articulate the thoughts to different groups. Anyways, so how does all of this help in our day-to-day communications? Well, first and foremost, I often rely on personal relationships. Remember what I said earlier about connection before content. If there's one thing you take from my presentation, it's the importance to establish connection before content while communicating. So I often rely on personal relationships to understand what managers, vice presidents, direct reports look for in their regular updates. Thus, throughout the years, I have created different templates that allow me to quickly send updates aimed at summarizing exactly what the different audiences need to know. Happy to share those after the presentation. My email will be provided. Feel free to reach out. And then going on to my last topic, conveying issues or errors. But before we even get started with this topic, I will yet again reiterate the importance of connection before content because conveying issues or errors can be very heavy and difficult to do. So remember, connection before content. Conveying issues or errors to upper management always requires a significant degree of assurance and certainty. I personally have found the best way to communicate issues and errors, whether it's to my direct reports or upper management, has been centering around high level details that are easy to understand and communicate. As I've mentioned before, there will be times, and in my line of work more often than not, where emotions can run high and triggers can easily be met, but being able to establish a connection prior to going through content really helps shepherd constructive conversations. Whether it's in personal life or the professional setting, going into a difficult conversation at ease and comfortable often yields the best outcomes. Some additional tips and pointers, because not all conversations, even those where we could establish connection before content, will end in a kumbaya or have a positive outcome, is having sufficient research to base your analysis and conclusions. Oftentimes, individuals will receive our message with some form of hostility, as it directly relates to something they've done. So, expecting a defensive response should be almost automatic. Thus, having sufficient and appropriate support to substantiate our findings is paramount. Oftentimes, I suggest anticipating some of the questions and forming hypothetical responses, but that could also turn into a quick time sunk. So I'd caution you on that. So, all in all, I think conveying issues and errors might be the most challenging form of communication, as it isn't always pleasant and it's a crapshoot guessing how the recipients are going to receive the message. But as I've mentioned before, establishing connection before content and having done our homework helps foster conducive conversations. With that being said, I appreciate you for your attention, and we'll turn it over to Alex as he will discuss the nuances of communicating with a global workforce. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Tony. All right, sorry. So when I was hired at Autodesk, I started with a team of 45 engineers here in the Bay Area in San Francisco, and half of us were foreigners. So a lot of us, needless to say, we're non-native English speakers. So if you fast forward a few years, as I've been in the company, I started to work with teams overseas, and of course, we're a very large company. We have offices in more than 40 different cities around the world, and we had issues communicating. I found out that being a non-native speaker helped me a lot, and I was in their shoes before when I moved here, so I had empathy for the struggles that I was living in and that they were living in this new model. And I'm going to share some of those lessons with you here. Next slide. So let's talk about the why. Why is it hard? Right. So if you're working with team overseas, odds are their native language is not English. Folks have also different accents and have different levels of fluency in their communication. You'll most likely be interacting with them over video conferencing, telephone calls, and written media, etc. Right? I've been working with those in that model for over 15 years. So I've seen every single video conferencing application that exists out there. And whenever somebody talks about Zoom and the pains of Zoom, I have to say, if you haven't experienced the old things we had 10, 12 years ago, Zoom is outstanding and awesome, as bad as it might seem. Something else that makes that communication hard is time zones. Now, imagine that I'm here in California and I have a team in Europe. Odds are that if I'm having a meeting with them, I'll be in my pajamas and they're going to be ready for happy hour at the end of the day. Two different mental modes, two different times, right? You're barely waking up where the other guys are like ready to go. So it makes it hard, not just physically, but also mentally, right? You're working long hours, and you're doing this extra struggle. It's outside of your 9 to 5 sort of mental model, right? And you're also dealing with emails. So sometimes it's not uncommon to see me sitting on the couch watching TV with Slack on, talking to somebody in China or Singapore, right? It's because they're on their day. I will do that instead of waiting for the next day. So it can be taxing, right? We also have cultural differences we need to be considered, right? How do you refer to another person? How do you engage with them? Employee-manager relationship, seniority, all these can make things difficult, right? We're Latin, we're warmer than most cultures are, so we have to learn how to handle that. Right? And those can make things difficult. They're nobody's fault, right? I've sat in meetings where an employee would not talk to me because his manager was in the room. And until she said it was okay for him to answer the question, he would just not talk, right? He would feel that the manager has to be that person talking. So how do we work through these? Next slide. So first and foremost, communication is a two-way street, right? Somebody's saying something, you're listening. You need to make sure that what was communicated is understood. So reflection is a very, very powerful way to do this. We've always heard that listening is very important. You have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so you should listen more. All those things that you've heard everybody talk about, they're true, right? So how can you show that you've listened is paraphrasing. So politely, when Tony says he's talking to an auditor, I can say, help me see if I understood this. The auditor said that. And then you're going to validate that you understood. You're going to paraphrase. You're going to essentially show that you listened. Other ways to say this is, just so I understand it right, you mean something, right? This is powerful, not just for communicating overseas. It's also communicating locally, right? If you're talking to other people in your daily life, even your partner, your kids, everyone around you. Most of our communication problems are because of assumptions, misunderstandings, wars, for all that matter, right? Because we make quick conclusions. So these tools help us validate that we're understood well. And interestingly enough, this also helps you show that humility, show that you're humble. Like, notice that I said, help me see if I understood this, right? It shows respect. It shows that you care and that you're listening. All right, next slide. One of the most important tools in working with global teams is asynchronicity, right? Asynchronous. We're working through written media. Like I said, you're typing on a chat window or something. So, and it's, of course, it has its pros and cons. Written media, like our chat window on the side here, right? Where is the intonation? So people add emojis, exclamation marks to sort of showcase, hey, this is a lighthearted communication. This is not serious, right? We do this to sort of convey emotion because written text doesn't do that. And written text at work not always should convey emotion. Sometimes you need to understand what is that line. And working with overseas, you also have to remove ambiguity, to be clear and concise, like Ileana mentioned. It's very important to put yourself on the receiver's shoes. The person reading that email, chat, etc. What are they going to think when they answer it, when they see it, right? The other thing that's important is to think ahead and be prepared, right? I really like Amazon's read a document before a meeting. I don't know if you've heard about it, but at Amazon, most meetings start with, hey, everybody sits and reads a document for 5 minutes, and then they go on to the next thing, right? Everybody's on the same page. You've done your homework. You understand the context. You understand the agenda. And as you over-communicate, you should also future-proof your team's needs, right? Like the example I gave of me here and somebody in Europe, right? By the time I go to sleep, they're not even awake yet. So you have to understand, hey, they're going to be working on this. They're going to need this information. They're going to need that, and really move things forward. Because if they find a roadblock, they're stuck for a whole day. And if they're stuck for a whole day, it's productivity loss, morale. All these things are gonna be negative for us. And then for meetings, something that I find really helpful is to get real-time documentation. We oftentimes go into Confluence Wiki or a shared Word document. All of us, the agenda and the notes are right there. We can all type. So you're crowdsourcing meeting agenda, you crowdsource note-taking. Everybody reads this. And in an environment where you're you're working with a global team, it helps because not everybody clicks the information when you say it, but they may visualize it, they may understand it when they read. And that also helps with that. Did I understand it? And when they read that, wait, that's not what I understood. That gives you the ability to actually um, provide that feedback in real time. Um, all right, and here on the right side, I have some tools that I've provided here, which I think were very interesting. GitLab is a tech company that works fully remote. So they have a very good work remote manifesto. Then they have everything you can think of on this topic. So when we switched to the Zoom mode over the last 18 months, I was referring to that a lot of times with my teams. Like, hey, these are some of the tips and tricks of what we need to do to help engage and make sure that everybody's working well. For effective meetings, Atlassian has a good set of documentation how to run effective meetings. And for one-on-one meetings, which I think sometimes people overlook one-on-one meetings, right? It's the 15.5 has a very good set of descriptions, and they even have an application, a SaaS app that helps you run one-on-one meetings, helps you get engaged with your employee, and do those much better. All right, next slide. Context. So both Ileana and Tony talked a lot about context. So I'm not going to dig too deep in here, but context is about people. Communication is about people, right? So get to know each other, make that connection, right? Today, all my one-on-one, we don't have, at least not us at work yet. We're not going to the office, so I don't have that water cooler time where I get to see somebody in the kitchen getting a coffee and saying hi and all that. So I take time to get to, hey, how are things going? How are things doing? That helps me see the other person much more than just a coworker, but helps us connect, helps us understand. When you're working on a team, same thing. What is the team dynamic, right? Understand that context. And again, if you're managing up or managing down, what are the contexts? How do you operate? Right? If you're managing your team, you need to be a little more direct. You can understand that context. If you're talking to your manager and the leadership, you have a different context you want to present. So understand that. Somebody mentioned in the chat they use GIFs and emojis. Those are good. Understand the context. Would you do that with the CEO of Disney? Maybe not, but maybe within peers, maybe within other workers, right? It all depends on that context. Right, next slide. So, and I'll leave that with a few more resources, but I'm gonna also fork off a little bit, right? So I found a lot of good stuff on the Harvard Business Review, but they're paywalled, so I'm not gonna mention that. If you have access to Harvard Business Review, just Google global communication, and there are lots of good articles there. GitLab has, again, in part of that tree of documents, a lot of things about good communication. And when we talk about communication, we don't talk about communicating with difficult people as much, right? And oftentimes, especially being a manager, you have to have that muscle. So this book is really, really good about that, and it will give you a few other tips on how to find your best situation there. The last one is more targeted toward managers, and I noticed some folks here were more senior, right? Is the situational leadership. It's really good to understand how do you meet the person that you're talking to on the other side, on their level. That is also a very interesting communication trick is to do here. Right. And then on that, we're going to go through a simple communication practice exercise. So next slide. So imagine you're in Europe right now, and you're sitting in the office, and you work for Facebook. And if anyone here works at Facebook, I don't want to put them down. They had a hard week already. We know that. This is just an exercise, right? But imagine that you work that and you realize that the site is down, right? So you're now going to send an email to your manager to say, hey, there's a problem, site's down. How would you do that? What level of communication how would that experience be, right? And again, like I said, you're in Europe, right? You're letting San Francisco know there's a problem. So you're leaving the office, you're pushing the problem to the other person, right? What subject would you use? Who's your coworker that you're notifying, right? Is it urgent? Maybe Facebook's down. The whole world knew about it, right? Do you need somebody to take action? So are you passing the ball? And are you making sure that it doesn't get dropped? Right. So next slide, Tony is going to walk us through one example of an email that could go out and then the pros and cons about it.
Thanks, Alex. So in this situation, I'm the manager and I received this email from a direct report. Hi. Hey, the sites are down. All of them. Can you help? Well, first off, it sounds like something my fiance would send and expect me to drop everything. So I'd instantly just question our email servers. But in all seriousness, this is not a very good email to be sending your boss. The subject is poor and lacks substance. The body of the email has no context and provides no detail to the issue. It sounds important, but I cannot gauge just how important based on the email. Sounds like I need to do something because they're asking for my help, but if I'm being honest, I wouldn't know what to do with this. Lastly, depending on the issue, email might not be the best method of notifying me of this issue. We might need to jump on a call ASAP. So let's try another example. Alex, next slide, please.
All right. So in this next example, we have a little bit more information, right? The subject's now, hey, the server's not working. The boss is upset. Mark is upset that the server isn't working. He wants it fixed, of course. Can you fix it? But the question is, where's the detail, right? What's going on? And then the other thing is, if you're passing the ball to somebody, you really need to pass the ball, right? Sorry for the pass the ball knowledge. May the folks that do soccer know that very well, right? So that is a critical thing here, right? So if you go to the next email, right, we now have a good formed something. Hey, it's 5 p.m. I want to know that the server is that specific server isn't working. I went in to check in. I did some troubleshooting. It didn't work. I'm not sure who to contact. So if you say I'm not sure who to contact, you're passing the ball, but you show that you don't know who it is. So you're now giving the person who receives the email the action to take care of it, right? I would say an email like this has a follow through, right? Or just like a Slack message that we mentioned. Right. All right. Next one, next email swings it all the way to the left. And it's probably something that Tony would get for from his legal compliance audit teams. Hey, I hereby inform you that the server is not working. Right. So it's sounds like a lawyer is telling you the server is not working. Pardon if anybody's a lawyer here, just using this playfully. But again, right. We can swing the pendulum too much to the other side, right? So it's sort of it's like, do we go full emoji gify kind of thing, or do we go full formal on the other end, right? We have to find that context. We have to find that balance, right? And sometimes the formal part is important. Some part it's not, right? An email like these might have exclamation marks to the wazoo, and that may be okay, right? Because it's urgent as heck. And then the other case would be maybe email's not the best place, right? Maybe the company has processes for things like this, right? You don't send an email to say the house is on fire. You call the fire department, right? So there's some very, very important context on those. All right. And with that, I'm going to move us to our Q&A. So I will ask you, I don't know how the Q&A works on this process. So we're all learning here, so I don't know if folks type on the chat or if there's a, yeah, there's a Q&A option here. So if anyone would like to ask a question, just go to the session Q&A on the right side, and there's a button at the bottom that says ask a question. And English, Portuguese, and Spanish are okay, I would venture say.
See.
Now also watch the chat.
I'm navigating through both of them. Anybody? Anybody brave out there to be the first one?
We have a question.
Let's see. Question from Chelsea. Do you have any recommended resources we can use around communication? LinkedIn, YouTube, etc. Alex, Ileana, I think y'all provided some resources in your guys' slides, right?
Yes, Tony. I think the question, just to clarify and also rephrase, Chelsea, are you asking about maybe some suggestions from us from this particular platforms, LinkedIn or YouTube? Is that right?
Yeah, so I will venture answering Chelsea. I think I don't know specifically about LinkedIn or YouTube. Ileana provided a few resources here, some on LinkedIn Learning and some books and websites. I also provided a few on websites and books. Mine are not necessarily, the books are not necessarily on communication in general, but they're targeted communication more for managers and difficult situations. And the reason why I did that is because we often don't talk about those. Right. All right, we've got a question from Andrew. What is good Zoom communication? That is a good question.
I like to keep my Zoom communication pretty professional, depending on how well I know the individual or the individuals on Zoom. Will really dictate how the mood of the conversation will go. Am I going to be leaning back or using slang? Because at times, if I'm speaking with someone that I'm really comfortable with and I communicate regularly, I will use slang. I will use comfortable language, and it's really kind of give or take. You gotta feel the audience. If it's your VP, if it's your senior or someone you're reporting to, you probably want to be a little more professional and make sure you're using proper verbiage versus if it's a friend or like a work friend that you're comfortable with and you're just needing to cram through some things. Feel free to have at it.
I think so having been on Zoom exclusively for the last 18 months, something that I do in all of my one-on-one meetings is to allocate at least 5 minutes to get a touch point on the person, not the job. Let's talk about how are things at home, how are your kids, how's wife, how's everything going, dogs, etc. Right? Is to keep it lighthearted and inclusive, right? We just got a pandemic puppy here, so he's locked outside because he oftentimes crashes the meetings. He comes lick my face all the time, and it's like you embrace it. Like you're human. I think that the humanity in ourselves, especially on leaders, is very important, right? Is very important to just like like Tony mentioned, like be vulnerable. It's okay, right? And embrace the world around you too, right? I know this isn't a conversation about pandemic or anything. It's the world around you. It doesn't matter, right? You have to go out to do something with your family, kids. It's part of life. We're all humans, and that's why we work. It's not the other way around. Right? So just show that side to people.
And I will just add one last thought here, and maybe we wrap up because I guess we are almost in the hour. But um, nowadays it's common to have 45 minutes agenda, because sometimes you're running out of time, and I think it's always good just to make sure you cover all the points in the time frame, and have a why of the agenda, like not the meeting because of the meeting, right? So have all the clear points in mind before you jump into Zoom, and allow some extra minutes for people to move to another call. That's always uh, uh, appreciated.
Thanks, Ileana. I provided my email within the chat box. Happy to help in any way that I can, whether it's career advice, mentorship, or just someone to shoot the shit with. Happy to do so. Yeah, I think that being said, we only got about a minute or so left. So thanks everyone for joining. Really appreciate you allowing us this platform to share and share some of our insights and be able to hang out with you all. I hope you took something out of this. My email's attached. Feel free to reach out with any questions. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Tony.
Adios.
Thank you. Gracias.
Gracias.
Obrigado.
Adios.